Gaza has become hell on earth and no place is safe.
International outrage over starvation and dire conditions. As the conflict in Gaza continues, I'm Sean Caleb sitting in for Anand Naidu, and you're watching The Heat. Welcome, everyone. We know at least 15 people have died of hunger in Gaza over the past 24 hours, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Now, in the last 3 days, the Al-Shifa hospital reported that 21 children died from malnutrition and starvation. This as a result of Israel's blockade on aid containing food, water, life-saving medical supplies. CGTN's Jonathan Regev has this report, as this has triggered widespread condemnation from Israel's allies.
Well, oddly enough, officially, Israel is not saying much. There was a tweet yesterday coming from Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, completely denying the allegations which were brought up by the nations. Many of them are Israel's allies regarding the aid in Gaza, and saying that there's plenty of food in Gaza, both coming in through to the UN distribution centers and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that American-based foundation distributing food in Gaza. But officially, Israel is not saying much about it, leaving the narrative pretty much to Hamas. Inside Israel, I can tell you that there's pretty much a mounting pressure to allow aid into Gaza, even from those who are supporting the war and see every justification in the continuation of this war and battling Hamas in the fiercest way possible. But many are saying that aid still should be distributed into the Gaza Strip, even if that would mean that this aid would fall into the hands of Hamas, as many in Israel are claiming. This due to the fact that even if Hamas is manipulating the real picture, there is some kind of hunger in Gaza. And also, Israel can't really ignore the international community forever. It is true that Israel enjoys strong American backing, but other nations, many of them allies of Israel, such as the United Kingdom, for example, and Italy and other European nations, are criticizing the way in which Israel is handling the distribution and the entry of humanitarian goods into Gaza. So even within Israel, there's a growing discourse in the past week regarding the deaths in Gaza, regarding the hunger in Gaza. But at least officially, the government is not saying much and keeping pretty much keeping pretty quiet, also raising a lot of criticism, especially from the opposition, which claims that Israel is completely abandoning the diplomatic arena and leaving all the narrative to the one raised by Hamas.
Jonathan Regev for us. Okay, let's talk more about this. Bring in our panel. Joining us here in Washington, D.C., Dan Arbell. He is a scholar in residence at the Center for Israeli Studies at American University. In the UK, Yossi Mekelberg is a senior consulting fellow of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. We also have William Lawrence. He is the director of area studies and senior academic fellow at the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations. And Jamal Abdi, president of the National Iranian American Council. I want to thank you all for taking time. Jamal, I want to start with you. We just heard a couple of things really jump out. Mounting pressure from Israel. We've been hearing that for how long now? And also Israel saying there's plenty of food and aid getting into Gaza. And the pictures that we just showed, the pictures that people have seen, certainly would play a much different tune. Now, I'm not in any way trying to rationalize what happened on October 7th that led to all of this. But at what point does international pressure, does it have some kind of impact on the Israeli government, considering everything that is playing out in Gaza right now?
Yeah, this is what impunity looks like. This is it's been over a year of total impunity for Netanyahu to wage this war, to kind of lie to our faces, lie to the international community's faces about what is actually happening. There's starting to be a little bit of pressure, but certainly not the type of pressure that one would expect when you have, a country credibly accused of committing a genocide, blocking aid shipments, implementing its own convoluted scheme to put mercenaries in charge of distributing aid in Gaza. And then we have daily reports of civilians either dying of starvation or dying from gunfire from supposed aid workers or the IDF itself. So at some point, you know, the international community and especially the United States needs to put its foot down and actually call this bluff. We also know that there is little incentive for Netanyahu to end this war and to end this, you know, the suffering and the killing, and every incentive for him to continue it, because it has been now widely reported that once the war is over, he loses his job and he probably goes to jail. So of course he's going to continue this war, and until somebody actually stops Israel from continuing this behavior, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And I fear that it's going to be not just Israel, but the United States and many others who will be left to pick up the pieces.
Indeed, there have been a lot of voices in Israel, too, of raising concerns. And if you look at the people who are suffering the most, women and children, some 90,000 women and children in serious, urgent need. We heard the hospital in Gaza, the one that's still functioning to a degree, talking about close to 24 children dying in just the past 24 hours. I'm sorry, that's for Jamal once again. Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking. I don't think anybody can see this, and I mean, I don't care what governments or organizations, terrorists, whatever it is. I don't care about them at this point. These are civilians who are dying. These are innocent children who are starving to death. This is a choice. This does not have to be this way, but it's a choice that has been enabled by those who continue to fund Israel's army and military and refuse to give a red light to these activities.
Yeah. And Dan, I want to turn to you now, because picking up on what the UN head of their relief organization said, that these distribution sites are just sadistic death traps, that it basically comes down to a contest of the fittest, because many people have to walk for many kilometers to get there, and then once they announce the food is there, it becomes a sprint to fight for whatever they can get.
Yeah, well, the situation in Gaza is tragic and it's heartbreaking for sure. And I think that an end of the war, or at least a ceasefire that they're trying to reach right now, a deal that will also allow some hostages being released, would pave the way to greater amounts of humanitarian aid and entering into Gaza. Israel made a mistake, is still making the mistake of not taking care of what happens on the day after the war, and has not created an alternative for Hamas, or has not helped to advance an alternative to Hamas. And we see the results on the ground. Now, I'm not a spokesman for the Israeli government, not anymore for sure. And I do want to say, though, that I don't believe that Israel has an intentional policy of starving people. And I think that what we're seeing, however, on the ground is this continued struggle for Israeli presence in the Gaza Strip, still fighting Hamas. Hamas really not doing anything to help its own population, and the results are sad and tragic.
Yossi, I want to pick up on what Dan just said. Israel not having a policy of deliberately trying to starve citizens in Gaza, but look at these distribution centers, both U.S. and Israeli backed. There used to be hundreds of these around the country, close to people's homes, where they could get to them, and we wouldn't have this kind of frenzy where people tried to get food and what other kind of aid they could get their hands on. And now what we're seeing is simply chaos. And when warning shots claim lives, the international perception certainly changes quite a bit. I want to get your reaction to what's playing out there right now.
Yeah, Dan might be right, and there is no intention to starve them. But I think at this point of the war, regardless of intentions or not intentions, we can judge it only by the result. And whether it's intentional or incompetence or carelessness or recklessness, it's all end in with the same result, that there are people starving there, that people are queuing for food, and instead of getting food that they need desperately, they end being shot. And we're talking about, according to some reports, more than 800 of them. So this is the only criteria that we can use at this point. It can be, at the beginning, it's some of teething problems, but when you're into a war of 22 months, and this is the end result of this, if Israel doesn't want to change, then the international community should react to that. Now, if I may add something else, at the end of the day, because Israel lacks any strategy in Gaza, it gets more and more embroiled in the daily security and protecting its own soldiers and entrenching its occupation of Gaza. And the result of it, that it's also there is more friction with the local population, but also it's Israel's responsibility. If it occupies the place, the well-being of the Gazan population is on Israel.
Yossi, I want to follow up just a bit because we heard at the top of the program that Netanyahu really has no reason to find some kind of ceasefire. I want to know if you agree with that. And also the voices within Israel are saying enough is enough. We had the former Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, come out and say, look, it's clear that Israel controls Gaza. They need to go in and make some kind of semblance of normalcy out of this.
I think, yes, what we had earlier, I agree. At the end of the day, Netanyahu is one interest. And the interest is to stay in power, because staying in power helps him to delay, maybe later to halt completely his corruption trial. And we see day in, day out, in the way that he's treating with complete disregard the judicial system, his own judges in the court. He appears, he doesn't appear for his cross-examination. So we know what is his game. Now, he also looked for the point that at one point or another, he will have to face the electorate. And sometime between now and October of next year, he will have to face the Israeli people in the ballot boxes. Now, most Israelis say for more than a year that their top priority is releasing the hostages, ending the war, and not continuing that at the expense also of the hostages. But because Netanyahu relies on the extreme right wing, which I think in their case, they really don't care if the entire population Gaza starves, as long as they can end by annexing Gaza and building settlements there. He will do whatever they want him to do until the point in which he declares election.
William, I want to bring you into the discussion. Thank you so much for being so patient up to this point. And if you look at UNRWA and the aid workers that are in there, a lot of people would say they're simply doing heroic work at this point. And now there are reports that those individuals are suffering as well, suffering from starvation, malnourishment, and the ills that come with that. I want to play what the UNRWA Director of Communications had to say about their situation on the ground.
There is nothing to buy on the street. We had one colleague who had to walk for hours before he could get to a place and buy a bag of lentils and some flour and paid almost $200 for it. The prices of basic commodities have exponentially increased by around 4,000% over the past while. So if it is happening to UNRWA staff, if it is happening to people who are working, who have some cash, then I can't imagine how it would be for the less privileged among people in Gaza.
Now, of course, the aid workers are going to be able to go home someday. The situation far different from the people on the ground there. But I want to get your thoughts on this situation in Gaza right now.
Well, first of all, hundreds of aid workers and journalists have been killed. And if it's one or two, that might be a mistake. If it's hundreds, that's deliberate. There are 9,000 lorries, trucks waiting on the border to bring food in. They're being blocked. That's deliberate. When baby formula gets confiscated from the suitcases of medical workers entering, that's intentional. When people are dying in a manufactured food crisis, and when prices are up 4,000% or whatever the UNRWA worker said, that's a deliberate siege and food as a weapon of war situation. So with all due respect to my two previous colleagues, it's clearly intentional. And Smotrich announced it at the beginning, 3 weeks in, or those early weeks. He said, we will starve it. And there's been an effective blockade now for over 15 years in Gaza, and there was starvation used as a weapon of war back in 2009 and previously. So this is a deliberate, intentional policy, even though most Israelis can't stomach it. I think if you look at polling, about 70% of Israelis would like this to end now for all the reasons that my colleague in London said, and people are tired of Netanyahu's lack of accountability, his corruption, and everything else. I agree with everything that was said about the Israeli far right and the domestic issues in Israel. But until the international community shames Israel enough, if the international community needs to shame the United States more,
right,
and then Israelis shame other Israelis, we will see children die of starvation. Now, it's happening now on an hour-to-hour basis.
William, you make some great points there, but what is it going to take for the international community? We know that more than 24 nations have now signed a proclamation urging an immediate end to the fighting in Gaza right now. Do you think that many of these nations have been just disconnected from reality, just not wanting to get involved? Why their voice is not being heard?
So that's deliberate. They didn't put out stronger statements earlier deliberately because they wanted to avoid the consequences from the United States and from Israel and from other parties about taking too strong of a stand. And there are a lot of advocates for Palestine right now are saying words don't matter. In a moment like this, we need actions, not words. But I actually disagree with that. It's only by the steady increase of shaming those who are arming Israel, supporting snipers, shooting at people getting aid. It's by shaming the United States and shaming the Israeli leaders into feeding the children. I mean, I've looked at the most optimistic estimates of the meals getting in it, and it's 20% of what's needed. No matter how many millions of meals, it needed to be hundreds of millions of meals, over the period they were talking about. And so it's only by, the work of the media, the work of activists, the work of international organizations, the work of United Nations rapporteurs, and all concerned citizens that we're going to get to a point where those that have been accused internationally of war crimes and those who are aiding and abetting those, are held to account. There needs to be a rising tide of condemnation for what's going on.
Jamal, the Arab League held an emergency meeting on Tuesday. What do we know, firstly, that came out of that meeting? And secondly, Hamas has been highly critical of Muslim nations, saying they have just been silent. They haven't been speaking up. And in their terms, there's genocide going on in Gaza right now. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's true, and we know that the Saudis have said behind closed doors that they don't really care about the MBS. We don't really care about the Palestinians, but our people do, and so this is bad optics. And I think what the upshot of this is that this experiment with normalization and the Abraham Accords is probably completely off the table. And I think we see that being played out in the strategy or lack of a strategy that Netanyahu has embarked on, which is to go to war sort of across the region, whether it's bombing Iran, bombing Syria, bombing Yemen. We are now, I think, looking at a situation where this is a moment where history is being written. This is a moment when borders may be redrawn, and I think Netanyahu is treating it as such and treating it as this is an opportunity for Israel to essentially be involved in a forever war well beyond its borders, extending across the region from Israel all the way into Iran. So I don't think that there are prospects for, the Arab League has endorsed a two-state solution, has endorsed a peace process. It very much seems like that is a distant memory at this point.
It does seem like quite a long time ago. Dan, I want to pick up on this measure that was signed by 28 nations saying that the war must end now, because Israel came out and said that that statement has been disconnected from reality, clearly giving that no chance. Firstly, your reaction to that, and how is history, I know it's kind of a heady question, but how is history going to look back on this period?
So first of all, I think that it's important that these 26 or 28 nations come together in such a statement. Some of them are great friends of Israel, like the UK, Italy, Austria, others. And so I think that Canada, and so it's certainly an issue of concern. But connecting to what other people said before, I think that at the end of the day, what matters to Netanyahu will be what Trump says. And as long as Trump is okay with what's happening, this will not stop. And I think that Trump is getting his patience, or the administration's patience is running out. And therefore, I think that they're rushing to try and get some sort of a ceasefire for hostage release deal in the coming days, hopefully to alleviate the pressures that exist. Certainly, to your other question about this period in history, I think it would certainly be a negative blot, or a dark blot in history, both starting October 7th with Hamas's attack, and continue subsequently with Israel, the war that Israel launched into Gaza, and certainly it will reverberate throughout the region and will impact generations to come.
Yossi, I want to talk about Israel attacking Gaza first, and then attacking Lebanon. Then just a couple of weeks ago, launching an assault, last week attacking Syria, and then of course the attack in Iran a couple of weeks ago. I want to get back to what Dan said about Trump and Netanyahu, because just before the attack in Iran, Trump had been saying, don't bomb Iran, and we'd also like Israel to find a way to find peace in Gaza. So, try to make sense of this for me, because there's so many accusations out there that Netanyahu and Israel just acting in a belligerent manner, basically willing to attack at will.
I think we need to unpack this. First of all, we know that we have quite a chaotic administration in Washington, and things that said one day or an hour ago become irrelevant an hour later. And that's, we see, don't attack Iran, but at the same time, when there is an opportunity to attack Iran, then the United States joined in. We can judge whether it was right and wrong, but the reality is there is no coherent policy. Only yesterday, the President Trump talks about too much killing in Gaza, which is correct on this, but is he going to do anything about that? Because as some of the previous speakers said, and Trump picked up the phone to Netanyahu and said the same that he told Netanyahu to turn back the airplanes from Iran on the last day and not to attack Iran, and it worked. He could have probably stopped the war in Gaza too, but he's saying one thing but not following it up. And I think that, in the case of Hezbollah, it was actually Hezbollah that joined the war after October 7. And kept bombing the north of Israel for months no end, nearly a year. And at the end of the day, from Israel's point of view, it seemed as a strategic victory for Hezbollah, and it had to react. I think Syria is different, because I think in Syria, Israel is taking liberties with the sovereignty of Syria, bombing, destroying its entire navy. Only last week, bombing the defense ministry, and I think that there is an issue that the international community should address as well. But I think still the core is the Palestinian issue. We're forgetting many times also what happened in the West Bank. And I think between what happened in Gaza and the West Bank remains the core issue in which the international community should do something about it.
Okay. William, I want to stick with Syria and talk about what the U.S. Special Envoy to Syria had to say about this recent attack. I want to play you a quick soundbite.
Well, we can't compel Israel to do anything, can we? That's not, America is not here to compel Israel to do anything. We're here to use our influence to bring calm minds together to come to a conclusion. The U.S. has no business in trying to compel Israel to do anything.
That flies in the face of what a lot of people internationally are saying. Your take on that?
Well, we've already seen the U.S. compel Israel not to do things. The delay of the attack in southern Gaza, the stopping of the attack for several months on Iran, and I could give a list of 10 or 12 other things that the Biden and Trump administration stopped Israel from doing, compelled Israel not to do in a quiet and diplomatic way. And so that's just a false statement. Now, if Ambassador Barak, Special Envoy Barak, is saying that he doesn't feel that that would be productive. He can't accomplish things by trying to compel Israel to do things. Then that's more of a political judgment on his point. And I think there's some truth to that. I mean, there's the old adage that Israel's the third rail of American politics, and that's still the case. And so the U.S. isn't going to push too hard until they are pushed to push harder. And that's true for the Syria piece of this, the Lebanese piece, the Gaza piece, the West Bank piece, the Houthi piece, the Iran piece, even the Jordan and Iraq pieces, where Israel does things that violate their sovereignty and sometimes make things worse. And so, you know, yes, the U.S. can compel. Whether it's willing to compel has been the $64,000 question since before October 7th and after.
When you spell it out like that with all those nations, you really understand the complexity. Jamal, we only have about a minute and a half, but I want to talk about something Trump first broached at first, about turning Gaza into some kind of vacation area, and the far-right conference at Knesset calling the Riviera in Gaza from vision to reality. How do these comments play out among people in that region?
I mean, it's insult to injury, it's cruelty. You know, I think that those comments play very poorly to people in the region and even people who voted for Donald Trump here in the United States, Arab Americans who voted for Donald Trump. I think a lot of people thought that Trump may bring some new ideas, may be willing to stand up against the shibboleths of Washington, D.C. And I think that remarks like that reveal just the lack of depth and the lack of seriousness and the cruelty that really are behind everything that we're seeing here with this president.
And with about 30 seconds to go, if I can quickly follow up, Israel's calling it a true Zionist goal, however. Your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I certainly think that there are members of of Netanyahu's cabinet, maybe Netanyahu himself, who believe that Israel needs to continue to expand. And I don't know if they're as concerned about the Riviera in Gaza as they are with taking the West Bank and taking potentially parts of Syria and who knows what else.
Indeed. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all. It's a very complex measure. It deserves more than 30 minutes. And I'm sure we'll have you all back here again in the near future to talk more about this. Okay, we're going to leave it there. I'm Sean Caleb's here in Washington, D.C. For all of us here, I want to thank you for watching yet another edition of The Heat.